From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here, and here's what's coming up. K-State's Ignacio Ciampitti will walk through the steps for estimating the yield potential of soybean stands as the pod filling stage begins. He cites the 4 factors that will determine that potential and how they figure into the calculation. Then Sarah Moyer talks with new K-State meat scientist Michael Chao. They'll discuss some of his research initiatives as he comes on board here at the university, including further work on developing the beef shank and other secondary beef cuts to meet the international demand for those cuts. And on this week's K-State Horticulture segment, Raymond Cloyd takes a look at several more insect pests at work on landscape woody ornamentals right now. All that and more right here on Agriculture Today.
While many people know hunger is an issue in developing countries, it is also a problem in our own backyards. In 2010, 1 in 7 Kansans struggled to put adequate food on the table. 2 K-State research and extension programs are tackling this problem. The Family Nutrition Program and Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program reach thousands of Kansans in more than 70 counties. They learn how to eat healthy with a low budget. For more information about these programs, visit ksre.ksu.edu.
You're listening to Agriculture Today. Glad to have you tuned in on this Thursday. Well, our soybean stands around Kansas, after an auspicious start, have settled into pretty decent conditions and better of late. And there's value for you producers in having an idea, as we head down these last few weeks of the production season, of what those yields might be. And so we're going to get into estimating soybean yield potential on this segment. Ignacio Ciampitti is with us once again, crop production and cropping systems specialist, K-State Research and Extension. So why would a grower want to go through this exercise, Ignacio, of estimating those yields at this point in the season?
Well, first of all, thanks, Eric, as always, for the invitation. I always take, the estimation on soybean yields as an excuse, really, for those growers and for us to go out and start looking at our crop. The next 4-5 weeks, soybeans will be defining the yields based on the seed weight. And that's one of the major components that once we start walking through the yield estimation, it will be the unknown. Mm-hmm. Seed weight can impact final yields by at least 30 to 40%. So what we are doing here is estimating potential, and that potential will change. Quite likely, it might change, based on the growing conditions from now until harvest.
Right. But seed weight is only one of several components, and actually there are 4 main things to consider here, right?
Yeah, and one of the things that, to clarify, when is the right moment and when is the right time to start doing yield estimations. Not too early, not too late. Not too early because, as I referred before, soybeans, they really form that yield towards the end. We already moved from flowering, we already passed pod formation, and in many situations we are already getting too close to beginning what we call seed filling. Mm-hmm. So those pod sizes are maximized. You can go out and start counting pods. You might see more pods coming, but those pods, based on growing conditions, so if you are coming too late, they might tend to abort. So today, when you go out to your soybean fields, and if you go out in the moment that you see on the upper section of the canopy in the crop maximum pod sizes, then I will feel comfortable as to start the yield estimation. Yield estimation is an excellent exercise, and we will be basically following on 4 specific yield components. So our first and one of the most important yield components on soybeans is the final number of plants.
You're looking at plants per acre here now.
Yes, exactly. On soybeans, since we have many number of plants, we would like to get more samples rather than just to get only a few samples. We rather want to understand the variability of a big field. If we are just being biased, if we go to the best looking section of the field, most likely you will get estimates that they will be on the high yielding side.
Right. You want a cross section of the entire field.
If you really want to get a good average for what soybeans will look across the entire field, you need to get representative samples. If we are working in a 100-acre field, and if 60 acres are really good, then I will probably take 60% of my samples in that section. And then if 40 acres are more in the lowest spots, bad looking crop, I will go there and take at least 40% of my samples in that section. By looking at entire sections, you will get a good representation of your entire fields. Okay, that's why it's important really to understand the variability. When we are thinking about number of plants per acre, one of the approaches that we are implementing on this analysis is taking a look to what we call the 21-inch. The 21-inch basically is just as within a row spacing that is a 30-inch, we are taking only one row, and we are looking at 21-inch row length. In that section specifically, when we are taking that 21-inch row length, we basically are looking to 1 of a 10,000 of an acre. So let's give an example. If a farmer was seeding 120,000 seeds, he was doing an initial stand count after planting, and then he knows for sure that roughly he finishing 100,000 plants per acre. So what you need to expect when you're looking at these yield estimations, you will go to this area of the field and you will start counting plants, and you will be counting 10 plants. Okay, 10 plants that they will be representing your 100,000 plants per acre. So again, the sampling size seems fairly small. But when you start thinking that, but I would like to collect 12 samples in the field, then
it starts to add up.
It starts to add quite quickly. And we want to make sure that the farmers are walking around making those yield estimations, also to really look at the status and the conditions of the crop. Okay. So number one, going back to this point, number of plants per acre, 21-inch row length if you have 30-inch row spacing. If you are looking at 15 inches, take 2 rows. Do the same, but just only take 2 rows, and then you add up how many plants you have in each of the sections, in each of the rows. If you have 7.5 inches, by math, we are taking 4 rows, and we are doing the same exercise. We basically count how many plants we have in 4 rows, in each of the rows, in, again, 21-inch row length. So with that, we got basically final number of plants per acre. So now what is next?
That would be how many pods per plant?
Exactly. The question now is, okay, make sure that you measure pods that they are on the maximum size. Consider only pod sizes that they are at least larger than 1 inch. Why I'm saying this is because if you are doing these yield estimates, I would like rather for you to get an underestimation on yield than a really high overestimation. If you start looking at small pods and counting those as a part of your crop, those pods will probably not produce, will not maximize in seeds, and then will not get any final yields. Then that's our second step. And then our step number 3 is, going in that direction, is looking at the total number of seeds per pod. On average, in many situations we see that we have around 2.5 seeds per pod. That means that you will find in many situations pods that they have 2 seeds or 4. Most likely in many environments we are seeing in many situations pods that they usually contain 3 seeds per pod. If you are under stress conditions, if you knew that basically that plant went through very severe environments, start looking at some of the pods because you might be ending in 1 or 2. If you are seeing pods that already are aborting, or if you are seeing seeds inside of the pods that basically are empty, meaning that those seeds, they basically abort, I would say it's a good step to make sure that you make those corrections. My approach many times when I do the yield estimate, I try to go and look at a few pods on the upper section, a few on the middle canopy, and a few in the lower section within the plant, because that gives me some idea of what's going on within the plant in terms of number of seeds per pod. And then we finally reach to the final factor, which is the unknown.
Which you mentioned earlier.
Right? So we say that normal to really large seed size, usually we are in 2,500 seeds per pound. If you are really in a small size means that you will get more seeds in a pound.
Right.
So small sizes usually are connected to 3,500 seeds per pound. So let's say that we are in a really excellent growing condition. We basically see that we have a total of 12 plants in 30-inch row. So we were targeting 120,000 effective plants. So in those 12 plants, we were measuring 22 total pots per plant. So in those 12 plants, we finished with a total of 264 pots. I started looking at the seeds numbers, per pot, and on average, in that plant, we were looking at 2.5 seeds per pot. So we are multiplying the total number of pots, 264 in those 12 plants, multiplied by the 2.5 average seeds per pot, and we are using a coefficient. In this case, we are using the coefficient that if the conditions were really good, the multiplication of pots and seeds per pot divided by 15, when we are doing this calculation, is giving us 44 bushels per acre. So now let's go back to a potential opposite situation. Now we have the same number of plants. In this case, the stress was coming a little bit early, so we are seeing that we are losing some seeds per pot. So we have 1.5 seeds per pot. So in that case, we are dividing that number by 21, reflecting basically a lower growing condition, not favorable environment. For that situation, using the same number of plants, our yield estimation is coming around 19 bushels.
Or less than half of what you had with 2.5 seeds per pod.
So that gives us basically some idea and where will we be standing at harvest. The yield estimate is an excellent tool, at least just to understand what is my potential.
But it really is a fairly straightforward formula. Detailing it here on the radio, somewhat tedious. But there is a good article that walks a producer right through this procedure in the E-Update newsletter series, right?
Yeah, exactly. We have an article going step by step with all the information related to basically, estimating soybean yield potential.
And that is the title of the article, as a matter of fact. And it is in the most recent Agronomy E-Update newsletter, dated this past Friday, the 24th of August. So they were looking for, again, estimating soybean yield potential. Ignacio, thank you for coming over and going through this step by step with us here.
Thanks again, Eric, for the invitation.
He is Ignacio Ciampitti, crop production, cropping systems specialist, K-State Research and Extension. We'll be back with more. You're listening to Agriculture Today.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
Welcome back to Agriculture Today. I'm Sarah Moyer, here to welcome on Michael Chao, who's joining the K-State Animal Sciences and Industry Department as a meat scientist. Good to have you on, Michael.
Hi, everybody.
So, Michael, you were born in Taiwan and then moved to California later, and some of your education started out there in California and your interest in meat science. So, would you explain a little bit about that?
Of course. Actually, I was born in Ohio.
Oh, excuse me.
No, that is fine. I don't have any memories regarding Ohio at all because my dad was a visiting scholar at the time, and I was only in Ohio till I was probably 6 months. So I have absolutely no memories of Ohio at all. Yeah. And like Sarah said, I lived in Taiwan till I was the age of 14, and then I moved to California when I started high school. I went to UC Davis for my undergrad and master's degree in animal science. And it was actually between my undergrad and master's that's when I had the opportunity to intern at U.S. Meat Export Federation. That actually triggered my interest in meat science. So hence, after my master's degree, I decided to leave California and go to Nebraska to study meat science with a focus in lipid chemistry. And after that, I went to California State University, Chico, with a teaching job for 3 years over there before I moved to Kansas.
And so there's many folks who wouldn't know what lipochemistry is. That's lipid profiling, to put in
Yes.
layman's terms, correct? So would you like to give a brief explanation about that for those unfamiliar with the subject?
Oh, absolutely. So my main expertise is really lipid profiling of membrane. For example, our cells have membranes, and when we understand the composition of these membrane, we can understand that, for example, your muscle contraction, if the integrity of the membrane is intact or not, and it's going to affect how much of the cellular function of the cell. So it is actually very, very important in terms of meat and muscle biology. I'm in the process of developing this fresh meat-based class that I also like to touch on not just the biology, but also the marketing as well, with the focus on export, actually. A lot of the folks didn't really quite understand the importance of meat export in this country. A lot of the cuts that we don't utilize in this country goes out, and people outside of this country are willing to pay a premium for these cuts. So that's going to be a big emphasis on my new fresh meat class.
And you will also be having some research going on, and that's to be determined. Again, you haven't been on campus very long, have you?
3 weeks now. In fact, 2 weeks, because 1 week I was traveling in Australia for a conference. So you're absolutely right. I haven't been here for too long. But I am in the process of establishing my lab right now. I work very closely with a lipidomic lab on campus, which lipidomic is just a fancy name for lipid profiling.
And so the fats there in meat, as a meat scientist, you spoke some about the export of meats here from the U.S., and that's one of your areas of expertise. For producers, what would you like to share about the export of meat in some of these niche markets or some domestic ethnic markets? Those are areas that you bring to the animal science department now with coming on board. So do you have any quick pointers for what that entails in current status?
Absolutely. So, for example, my lab is currently working on a beef shank project. As most of you may know, that beef shank is not particularly a very popular item in the United States. But it is a very popular item in China, for example, because the Chinese ethnic group really value the texture of connective tissue in stewed beef. So currently we are profiling all the different muscle types in beef shank, and we're correlating the sensory results of these different muscles with the amount of connective tissue as well as the quality of the connective tissue within these beef shanks. And hopefully we can create a baseline for the beef shank that anything that's above these baseline, we can warrant a premium in the Chinese market.
And so that should trickle down to producers if this would go as planned, correct?
Oh, absolutely. So in this case, currently we're selling all the beef shanks as one uniform price. And with my research, we can actually generate different pricing points for different muscles in the beef shank.
And you have quite a bit of experience professionally from your internship that you'd mentioned earlier and otherwise in U.S. beef and lamb processing plants. Is that where some of this niche area knowledge has been gained from? Or, of course, then also some of your education would back that up?
Oh, absolutely. So this mainly came from my cultural background. Like I said, I grew up in Taiwan till 14 years old, but even after I moved to the United States, my diet is still very Asian diet based, let's put it that way. And these are the items that I enjoyed myself. For example, the beef shank or the short ribs, the flanks, that a lot of the time connective tissue is not very valued in this country, but I really enjoy it. So like Sarah was talking about, through those beef plant and lamb plant auditing tours, I definitely get to see how a lot of these products are actually being produced in this country. and also at the same time allowed me to build connections with these plants that I'm able to collect these particular samples from them.
So it sounds like with your layered experiences, both your teaching and research will be benefiting from that. What other industry experience from your previous background are you excited to bring forward here to K-State?
So what I can bring in here the most is probably my international experience. Because I'm fluent in both Mandarin and English, a lot of the time when I attend these international conferences, I'm able to make relationship with universities and institutions, government officials in many of the Asian countries. And I would really like to create a lot of these international relationship with them to bring in visiting scholars or even have our students to visit their beef and pork production facility as well as their slaughter facility and learn about how they produce their meat product.
That sounds exciting, and more information will come in the future as Michael Chao is just coming on board, very new to the animal science department here at K-State. Michael, will you talk about your impression of the group of meat scientists at K-State as a whole? What are some strengths that are brought forward, and how are those helping producers to know more about the product that they're producing?
Oh, absolutely. I think we're in a great position here because I work with a good group of people that currently we have 5 meat scientists within the Department of Animal Sciences and Industry. I work very closely with every single one of them. The first one I want to talk about is Dr. Travis O'Quinn. He is a sensory scientist. So, for example, the beef shank project I was talking about, he will be able to help me out to set up these sensory analysis for the different beef shank type. I also work very closely with Dr. John Gonzalez, who is a growth and development scientist that he focuses on understanding muscle type. So, for example, when we put implants, how is that going to affect meat tenderness? And then finally, the other two that we have, one is Dr. Terry Hauser. He is a processed meat scientist, and he's also a meat extension specialist. He's going to help me out in terms of connecting with a lot of the producers in this great state. And then finally, we have Dr. Liz Boyle, who is a meat safety specialist. That her work mostly focuses on the meat microbiology side. And again, we're going to work together on some of the food safety projects.
So an exciting team there, and now a new addition here as Michael Chao joins. And folks out there are welcome to contact them with any questions they might have about meat or meat safety, international markets, what's going on. So this is an exciting addition, and it's great to have you on, Michael, to introduce you here.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Once again, that was K-State meat scientist Michael Chao, who's joining the K-State Animal Sciences and Industry Department and expanding the knowledge base that the university and the Animal Science Department has on meat. Some of his specialties include lipid profiling in meat and also working with niche meat processing techniques that serve international markets. I'm Sarah Moyer, and we'll be back here on Agriculture Today.
Did you know every Kansas farmer feeds 128 plus people?
Kansas farmers are hard workers, dependable, authentic, and sensitive.
Not only do farmers put food on your table, but they put clothes on your back and fuel in your car.
For more information about Kansas farmers, visit K-State Research and Extension online or stop by your local extension office. This message has been brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
This is the K-State Radio Network, and welcome back to Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. From today's agricultural news page now, these headlines, courtesy in part of DTN. USDA Secretary Sonny Perdue responded to criticism from a top corn producers group of his agency's trade aid plan for farmers, insisting that the level of assistance corresponded with calculations of economic damage caused by new tariffs. The National Corn Growers Association President Kevin Skunas told Secretary Perdue yesterday that he's disappointed corn growers stand to receive a penny per bushel for losses incurred in the summer's trade disputes. Skunas said the federal government's $12 billion aid package fails to calculate losses corn growers have suffered from tariffs, especially on ethanol and dried distillers' grains. The byproduct, of course, fed to livestock. Prices, said Skunas, have declined about 44 cents per bushel, or $6.3 billion worth, reflecting an industry study there. He said, quoting, "We don't feel it's fair and equitable." Now, the Secretary responded that the calculations are based on actual tariff disruption damage to the crop, adding that the numbers, as he said, are the numbers. These are the calculations you have to defend in court. Considering the possibility of a World Trade Organization challenge, Perdue said the damages corn growers have had from tariff retribution have been minimal. Offering some assurances, though, to Midwest farmers, Secretary Perdue said yesterday that he got a call from President Trump just as he was heading into the Farm Progress Show, saying that, quote, "We need to get that year-round E15 done." The Secretary said yesterday that hopefully the Trump administration will have an announcement on year-round 15% ethanol blends sooner rather than later. But there needs to be some rebalance with refiners, he added. The Secretary also said EPA Acting Administrator Andrew Wheeler understands the importance of moving ahead on year-round E15. And the Agriculture Secretary defended the U.S. trade actions while arguing that the $4.7 billion in trade aid announced on Monday will take some of the sting out of the lost exports while the U.S. continues to recalibrate the trade relationships with China, Europe, Japan, and North America. The Secretary commented specifically on recent discussions between U.S. and Chinese officials attempting to resolve current trade disputes. More on that from the USDA's Rod Bain.
As word Wednesday of U.S.-Canadian trade negotiations resuming days after an announced deal between our nation and the third member of the North American Free Trade Agreement, Mexico, perhaps forgotten in recent trade talk activity was last week's discussions between negotiators from the U.S. and China. As Agriculture Secretary Sonny Perdue explained Wednesday at the Farm Progress Show in Iowa,
I think really the story is we're trying to lower expectations, but I think the good news is that we're doing it at a foundational level of minister to minister right now, not upper level, trying to lay that groundwork of where we agree, where we don't agree.
The Secretary believes this ground-level approach will be beneficial in moving talks towards a positive outcome for both nations.
Obviously, I believe that it's going to take the President and President Xi of China to close the deal and make the announcement. I believe there's still good work going on.
I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
A 6-year-old mixed-breed beef cow in Florida tested positive for an atypical case of bovine spongiform encephalopathy, the USDA announced yesterday. The USDA stating the animal never entered slaughter channels and at no time posed any threat whatsoever to the food supply or to human health in the United States. USDA's Animal and Plant Health Inspection Services National Veterinary Services Laboratories confirmed that the cow was positive for atypical H-type BSE. The animal was first tested at the Colorado State University Veterinary Diagnostic Laboratory as part of routine surveillance of cattle deemed unsuitable for slaughter. According to the USDA, APHIS and Florida veterinary officials are gathering more information on the case. Classical BSE has been linked to variant Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease in people. Of the 5 previous U.S. cases, the first one in 2003 was a case of classical BSE in a cow imported from Canada. The rest have been atypical H or L type BSE. Therefore, the finding of an atypical case will not change the negligible risk status of the U.S. and should not lead to any trade issues. Next up for you on Agriculture Today, this week's version of the Kansas Soybean Update. And standing by with that is Greg Akagi. Greg?
Noah Scrimshire from Perry, Kansas, who will be a junior at Kansas State University, is joining us, and he served as one of the interns with Kansas Soybeans this summer. And Noah, I know they really get you on the ground running as soon as you start your internship.
When we first got in there, we have shared files on the computer and everything, and they're just giving you full access. And it's really a hands-on approach.
So what were some of the things you did this summer?
We had a big report that we gave to some of our congressional members out in Washington, D.C. We put together a biodiesel survey to survey retailers within the state. We put together a corporate tour down to Wichita for different aspects of the soybean industry. So we've gotten to travel quite a bit. We've done a lot of office work and just really made a connection to consumers and producers.
You're majoring in agribusiness at Kansas State. What got you interested in wanting to be a part of this internship?
Mr. Hoopy there, the director of field services, so he's been working on me for a couple of years, but I saw the email as well, was very interested, and I see the connection between the communications work we do and marketing.
And especially with a commodity like soybeans, that is so important, not only from the legislative perspective, but as you just mentioned, the marketing perspective too.
Yeah, of course, especially in a time right now where we've got so many political obstacles and we also have obstacles such as drought. So you've got to find a way to get the product out there, and we've got a unique way of doing that here at Kansas Soybean.
What was the biggest thing you learned in this internship?
The biggest thing that I learned was being pretty detail-oriented. We had a lot of different tasks, and it was easy to get distracted. So having a good list of things to do and making sure to find the right people, and we have the right people there. So getting the correct information is key.
If there's a student out there who might have an interest in this, why should they sign up? Why should they apply for this internship?
It really is the connection to the people in the industry that I've really enjoyed. And for somebody that's grown up on a farm and a ranch, getting to see this side of the industry, working in an office is huge. So if you have the opportunity, it'd be a great chance.
And really talking to the producers, that had to be a pretty satisfying experience.
Yes, sir. Meeting people from all across the state under different conditions and getting to learn from them and kind of the ins and outs. It's just, as a young guy trying to get into the industry, there's nothing better.
That is Noah Scrimshire from Perry, Kansas, who will be a junior at Kansas State University. He joins us on the Kansas Soybean Update. It's brought to you by the Kansas Soybean Commission.
Greg Akagi with the update. Many thanks, Greg. And we'll return with still more after you hear this. This is Agriculture Today. For 25 years, K-State Research and Extension's Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services has been providing a no-cost, confidential place to call in and visit with an agricultural lawyer. Our experts are available to help you producers handle legal and financial issues. Explore your options and generate solutions. Call us at 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. You're tuned into Agriculture Today, and now our weekly K-State horticulture segment for you, and catching up on insect activity here as we eventually transition from late summer into early fall. Alongside, once again, is Raymond Cloyd, horticultural entomologist with K-State Research and Extension. On the positive, we see butterflies now in abundance in Kansas, Raymond.
Yes, we do, Eric. Monarch butterflies are starting their migration back to Mexico, where they'll basically overwinter down there on these trees. But you also some plant milkweed plants, we find a lot of larvae on them. In fact, some areas of Manhattan, we have found like 4 to 5 larvae on a plant, the caterpillar, and we've also seen some of the nice, beautiful chrysalis, which is the cocoon they leave, which is light green with a band of gold around it. It's a very picturesque, and that's where the butterfly is going to come out of, and then they'll continue the migration down south. So we're seeing a lot of good activity, which is, of course, monarch butterflies like bees. There's been issues about their decline, many reasons for that, but when you see them, don't kill them, just leave them alone and observe them, use for educational purposes, and let them make their way down south.
They don't cause any issues whatsoever to landscape plantings at all?
No, the larvae are strictly feeders on milkweed plants. They're very selective because they get the chemical, when they're in the feeding, they obtain a chemical. It's an alkaloid, and then when they become an adult, that's when they're poisonous, and that's why birds leave them alone.
Mm-hmm. Monarch butterflies on the move, but appreciate them while they're making their brief stopover in Kansas on the way south for the winter. Must bring up once again, Raymond, squash bugs in our vegetable gardens, and you say they have not let up.
No, we're still getting inquiries, because they can be a problem until pumpkin season, because they will actually feed on mature pumpkins. So if you want to preserve your pumpkins and other cucurbits, you need to deal with them. And, the adults are hard to deal with because of that waxy cuticle that prevents the insecticide from binding or latching on and then moving into the system. So hand picking, vacuuming, other means are still available, but you still need to be on the watch out for squash bugs. Yeah.
So you would go with the cultural control as opposed to an insecticide at this point, or what?
Well, if you're dealing with lots of adults, Eric, you probably want to vacuum or hand pick. Insecticides are just going to be less effective. Now, you can add a surfactant or a spider sticker to possibly enhance the efficacy. That would allow the insecticide to stick to the adult and then get into the insect and possibly kill it.
But it doesn't take too many squash bugs to inflict damage on cucurbit crops and other crops in the garden.
No, and you can have both nymphs and adults feeding simultaneously too, yeah.
So for yet a few weeks yet, stay on the alert for squash bug activity and act accordingly in your vegetable plantings. And fall webworms are now found in a few trees out there, you say?
Yes, we are now experiencing the second generation of fall webworm, hickory, walnut, hackberry, birch. But really, this is the generation we don't really worry about because the trees are going into that reproductive mode or the storage mode for the winter. So either just leave them alone or you can prune them out and then throw them on a compost pile or dispose of them. But really, there's really no need to spray at this point because of the time of year that they're attacking the trees, and the trees got lots of foliage generally. So don't spray, but you can prune out the damage or just live with it.
Just for clarification, what is one looking for signs of fall webworm activity?
What you'll see in, for example, like hickory, if you drive along parts of Kansas, is these webs in these trees. Inside those webs are the larvae of the caterpillar, and they stay in there, unlike eastern tint caterpillar and others. So it's hard to get a spray at them at that point. Now, you could take a rake or a forceful water spray to disrupt it, but again, they're really not going to cause any physiological harm to the plant because the plant's going to be allocating resources for the upcoming winter season.
Just let it be, basically.
At this point, yeah. And if it really disturbs you, prune it out and put in a compost pile or burn it or whatever.
You say now we see here and there buildup of what it's called scale on euonymus plants out there, right?
Yes, this is the time of year people start noticing euonymus scale because it's especially in abundance on the euonymus and pachysandra. The white organisms are the males, the dark brown are the females. The females tend to reside on the stem, and the males on the leaves. There's really nothing you can do right now. It's too late, but you can prune it back and then allow the new growth to come out and then dispose of what you pruned out. But what you need to do is next year is use an insecticide like a horticultural oil, insecticidal soap or contact and kill them when the crawlers are active. And you can contact our office for one to find out, when would be the best time to spray. For the crawlers.
But the late summer, early fall would not be a terrifically good time.
You're not going to get much mortality with your insecticides at this point, Eric, yeah.
Right, so tuck that information away for next spring if you have scale on your euonymus and act at that time. Do check with your local extension office for information on contending with that. You say that K-State Entomology has a new publication out, Pesticide and Bees, and you alluded to this earlier, our concerns over bee populations out there and what we can do to best protect those. This publication gets at that question?
It does, Eric. I spent about 2 years developing it. It just came out. It's got a URL number. You can actually just Google Pesticides and Bees, Kansas State Extension publication. And in the development, the goal was to make people aware of the impact of pesticides and pollinators and kind of diffuse some of the supposed issues with the neonicotinoid insecticides and their effect on bees. But it just provides guidelines. If you're going to use pesticides, use them in the early morning, late evening, when the bees are not active. Don't apply them to flowering plants and such. So it's a really extensive publication. I'm very proud of it, and I think it's going to be a valuable resource for people to obtain and understand, the complexities, the interactions that occur with pesticides and plants and bees out there. It's not simple. It's not cut and dry, but again, it's also designed to help people If they're going to use pesticides, use them accordingly so they have minimal impact on pollinators, especially bees, honeybees, and bumblebees.
It clears up some important questions because there's been quite a dialogue about that in recent years, and the facts would be important here.
Absolutely. I think, as Jack Webb said in Dragnet, just the facts, ma'am.
And they're all right there on pesticides and bees, the interaction of those two. And it's a new publication out of K-State Research and Extension. You can search for that at the K-State Research and Extension website or the entomology website as well. That, by the way, in closing, is among many Extension informational resources on insects. Entomology.ksu.edu is a good starting point for finding out about those. And Raymond, as always, thanks for coming over.
It's always a pleasure, Eric. Look forward to our next visit.
Our regular briefing on horticultural insect activity around Kansas. Raymond Cloyd, horticultural entomologist, K-State Research and Extension, on this week's K-State Horticulture segment. Well, our time's away once again. Thanks to you for being along with us, and we invite you to rejoin us this same time tomorrow right here. Until then, Eric Atkinson bidding you a good day for Agriculture Today. This is the K-State Radio Network.